This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. H. Rider Haggard, Ayesha, The Return of She. Chapter 9. The Court of Kaloon. Horrified, sick at heart, we continued our journey. No wonder that the Khania hated such a mad despot. And this woman was in love with Leo, and this lunatic Khan, her husband, was a victim to jealousy, which he avenged after the very unpleasant fashion that we had witnessed. Truly an agreeable prospect for all of us. Yet I could not help reflecting, as an object lesson, that horrid scene had its advantages. Now we reached the place where the river forked at the end of the island, and disembarked upon a quay. Here a guard of men, commanded by some household officers, was waiting to receive us. They led us through a gate in the high wall, for the town was fortified, up a narrow stone paved street, which ran between houses apparently of the usual Central Asian type, and, so far as I could judge by moonlight, with no pretensions to architectural beauty, and not large in size. Clearly our arrival was expected, and excited interest, for people were gathered in knots about the street to watch us pass, also the windows of the houses and even on their flat roofs. At the top of the long street was a sort of market place, crossing which, accompanied by a curious crowd who made remarks about us that we could not understand, we reached a gate in an inner wall. Here we were challenged, but at a word from Simbri it opened, and we passed through to find ourselves in gardens. Following a road or drive, we came to a large rambling house or palace, surmounted by high towers and very solidly built of stone in a heavy, bastard Egyptian style. Beyond its doorway we found ourselves in a courtyard surrounded by a kind of veranda, from which short passages led to different rooms. Down one of these passages we were conducted by the officer to an apartment, or rather a suite, consisting of a sitting and two bed chambers, which were panelled, richly furnished in rather barbaric fashion, and well lighted with primitive oil lamps. Here Simbri left us, saying that the officer would wait in the outer room to conduct us to the dining hall as soon as we were ready. Then we entered the bed chambers, where we found servants or slaves, quiet mannered, obsequious men. These valets changed our footgear, and taking off our heavy travelling robes, replaced them with others fashioned like civilized frock coats, but made of some white material and trimmed with a beautiful ermine fur. Having dressed us in these, they bowed to show that our toilet was finished, and led us to the large outer room where the officer awaited us. He conducted us through several other rooms, all of them spacious and apparently unoccupied, to a great hall lit with many lamps and warmed, for the nights were still cold, with large peat fires. The roof of this hall was flat and supported by thick stone columns with carved capitals, and its walls were hung with worked tapestries that gave it an air of considerable comfort. At the head of the hall on a dais stood a long narrow table, spread with a cloth and set with platters and cups of silver. Here we waited till butlers with wands appeared through some curtains which they drew. Then came a man beating a silver gong, and after him a dozen or more courtiers, all dressed in white robes like ourselves, followed by perhaps as many ladies, some of them young and good looking, and for the most part of a fair type, with well cut features, though others were rather yellow skinned. They bowed to us and we to them. Then there was a pause while we studied one another, till a trumpet blew, and heralded by footmen in a kind of yellow livery, two figures were seen advancing down the passage beyond the curtains, preceded by the Shaman Simbri and followed by other officers. They were the Khan and the Khania of Kaloon. No one looking at this Khan as he entered his dining hall clad in festal white attire would have imagined him to be the same raving human brute whom we had just seen urging on his devilish hounds to tear a fellow creature and a helpless horse to fragments and devour them. Now he seemed a heavy, loutish man, very strongly built and not ill looking, but with shifty eyes, evidently a person of dulled intellect whom one would have thought incapable of keen emotions of any kind. The Khania need not be described. She was as she had been in the chambers of the Gate, only more weary looking. Indeed her eyes had a haunted air, and it was easy to see that the events of the previous night had left their mark upon her mind. At the sight of us she flushed a little, then beckoned to us to advance and said to her husband, "My lord, these are the strangers of whom I have told you." His dull eyes fell upon me first, and my appearance seemed to amuse him vaguely; at any rate he laughed rudely, saying in barbarous Greek mixed with words from the local patois, "What a curious old animal. I have never seen you before, have I?" "No, great Khan," I answered, "but I have seen you out hunting this night. Did you have good sport?" Instantly he became wide awake and answered, rubbing his hands, "Excellent. He gave us a fine run, but my little dogs caught him at last, and then—" and he snapped his powerful jaws together. "Cease your brutal talk," broke in his wife fiercely, and he slunk away from her, and in so doing stumbled against Leo, who was waiting to be presented to him. The sight of this great golden bearded man seemed to astonish him, for he stared at him, then asked, "Are you the Khania's other friend whom she went to see in the mountains of the Gate? Then I could not understand why she took so much trouble, but now I do. Well, be careful, or I shall have to hunt you also." Now Leo grew angry and was about to reply, but I laid my hand upon his arm and said in English, "Don't answer, the man is mad." "Bad, you mean," grumbled Leo, "and if he tries to set his cursed dogs on me, I will break his neck." Then the Khania motioned to Leo to take a seat beside her, placing me upon her other hand, between herself and her uncle, the Guardian, while the Khan shuffled to a chair a little way down the table, where he called two of the prettiest ladies to keep him company. Such was our introduction to the court of Kaloon. As for the meal that followed, it was very plentiful but coarse, consisting for the most part of fish, mutton and sweetmeats, all of them presented upon huge silver platters. Also much strong drink was served, a kind of spirit distilled from grain, of which nearly all present drank more than was good for them. After a few words to me about our journey, the Khania turned to Leo and talked to him for the rest of the evening, while I devoted myself to the old Shaman Simbri. Put briefly, the substance of what I learned from him then and afterwards was as follows. Trade was unknown to the people of Kaloon, for the reason that all communication with the south had been cut off for ages, the bridges that once existed over the chasm having been allowed to rot away. Their land, which was very large and densely inhabited, was ringed round with unclimbable mountains, except to the north, where stood the great Fire Peak. The slopes of this peak and an unvisited expanse of country behind that were the home of ferocious mountain tribes, untamable highlanders who killed every stranger they caught. Consequently, although the precious and other metals were mined to a certain extent and manufactured into articles of use and ornament, money did not exist among the people either of the plain or of the mountain, all business being transacted on the principle of barter, and even the revenue collected in kind. Amongst the tens of thousands of the aborigines of Kaloon dwelt a mere handful of a ruling class who were said to be, and probably were, descended from the conquerors that appeared in the time of Alexander. Their blood, however, was now much mixed with that of the first inhabitants, who, to judge from their appearance and the yellow hue of their descendants, must have belonged to some branch of the great Tartar race. The government, if so it could be called, was on the whole of a mild though of a very despotic nature, and vested in a hereditary Khan or Khania, according